I did not. I was in an until.
Once Randy's back in, we'll have a quorum physically present.
Yeah.
She's going to Zoom in tonight. She's sharing the screen right now from her house.
Can we start?
Yep.
Okay. It's a little past 7, so I'll open the Plan Commission meeting. Call it to order and we'll do roll call.
Bruce,
Here.
Harp,
Here.
Heniro. Here. Summers. Here. And Sonntag is present. Adams is absent and excused.
Very good. Let's look at the minutes. Do we have any changes, updates to the minutes? Hearing none, I'll call the minutes approved. And that takes us to the first item on our agenda, which is amending the previous approval of a certified survey map for Leo Cancer Care at 7921 UW Health Court. Do I hear a motion?
Bruce will make a motion to approve the certified survey map as revised.
Is there a second?
This isn't, oh, go ahead.
Harp will second.
Very good. Okay, it's been moved and second. Is there discussion? None? Lisa, you, okay. Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
If I may just add
Yes.
a comment there, and Alder Heniro, you'll be pleased by this too. I researched Robert rules for how to handle this. And it wasn't, I was debating whether it was originally a motion to reconsider, but I decided that was inappropriate. So I looked at the books that you guys got, and that's where I picked that from. So
It's
I
good.
hope that was okay.
Yep.
All right. For the next second item on the agenda is the transportation planning presentation by Charles Myers. Charles, welcome.
Thank you.
Are we good?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. I'm
We're good.
Great. Members of the Plan Commission, thank you for inviting me here tonight to discuss Middleton's transportation infrastructure and planning. I'll start with an overview of our planned road construction for the present year and the 5-year street improvement plan recommended by our committee, and then move on to a discussion of bicycle routes in the city, followed by a discussion of pedestrian safety concerns that have come before Public Works. I will conclude with a discussion of some broader suggestions for the Plan Commission about a way that Public Works Committee feels the city could improve upon the implementation of the Complete Streets policy and an improvement to the neighborhood traffic management process. For the present year, PwC has recommended a bid by Speedway Sand and Gravel for the reconstruction of Lake Street and Dewey Court. This project, if approved by council, will be completed by October 31st and take place during a 90-day window. For resurfacing of Elmwood Avenue, Kenyon Drive, and North Westfield Road, PwC has recommended a bid by Payne and Dolan Incorporated. For the Pleasant View Road reconstruction, the city is replacing stop-controlled intersections with roundabouts, and PwC has recommended ordinance changes. Moving forward to future years, in 2025, the Parmenter Street reconstruction approved designs are contingent upon the acquisition of easements from property owners. In 2026, the Century Avenue resurfacing has been moved to 2029. We had planned on a road diet study for 2025. For 2027, Stonefield Road and a number of streets connected to it will be resurfaced. Those are among the most in need of resurfacing in the city. In 2028, for high road reconstruction, it is our hope to be able to make bicycle and pedestrian safety improvements. Moving on to Middleton's bicycle trail network, the planned replacement of of the bridge crossing Pheasant Branch Creek includes a bicycle path underneath the bridge, allowing cyclists to cross without needing to use the Branch Street intersection. It is also our hope to be able to place signs marking Elmwood Avenue as a designated bicycle route. It is currently listed as one on our city website, but the lack of visual reference is not helpful to the cyclists who use it or to the drivers who use the road. For pedestrian safety, the Public Works Committee has received a number of complaints from residents about issues that they have experienced as pedestrians in Middleton. We take these complaints seriously and have dedicated committee time to addressing them. Currently, the Public Works Department is looking to move forward with a leading pedestrian interval study, and we have budgeted funding for potential safety improvements at Park and Elmwood, although we may need to increase the amount allocated for this based on responses that engineering staff have received. We are also exploring a bump out at the intersection of Park and Brookdale in the event that a crossing guard is not placed there. Consistent with the comprehensive plan, we now include discussions of crash records as a routine part of road discussions. Finally, I would like to expand this conversation into two broader points, which I think the Plan Committee may find useful. First, Middleton's Complete Streets policy is a great vision for improving our streets for all users. Its implementation section, however, could benefit from the inclusion of twice yearly joint meetings between the Pedestrian, Bike, and Transit Committee and the Public Works Committee. In our committee discussion of my testimony last night, this suggestion received unanimous support. We think that a joint discussion of planned road projects will be helpful. I have spoken to the chair of Ped, Bike, and Transit, and he is amenable to this proposal as well. Second, the Ped, Bike, and Transit Committee met and discussed tactical urbanism studies. The Public Works Committee is supportive of including tactical urbanism studies as part of the neighborhood traffic management program, with the caveat that some of these studies may not be cost feasible to include. And I understand, based on my conversations with Mark, that planning staff are supportive of this as well. Thank you for your
Great.
time.
Any questions? Charles? No?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rain.
I appreciate the overview. It was very helpful. I'm excited to hear about some of the suggestions that are being made. You talked about tactical urban studies. Did I get that correct? That nomenclature correct? Could you just tell me what that is?
Oh, yeah. So tactical urbanism is a movement in design where what we'll do is we'll try to install a temporary feature to see how it impacts behavior on a street. So Middleton has done this exactly once, and it was a roundabout on Elmwood. Based on the feedback that we've received from people involved with that study and other stakeholders, we do think that it would be a good idea to include them in the neighborhood traffic management planning process when possible. Sometimes the implementation of the study is not cost feasible. For instance, speed humps, the temporary speed humps cost about as much to install as the permanent ones. So it doesn't really make sense to use them. In the context of a study, you may as well just install the permanent one and then remove it, and it'll cost the same. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah. Right. Good. Well, I have noticed other communities doing things like this, so it makes sense to me.
You know, it's interesting. I've watched the speed hump at Costco go in and out about 3 or 4 times. They seem to use something you can just lay down and maybe attach somehow with a spike or something, but that doesn't seem like it would be as expensive as a permanent one. but I don't know.
My understanding, when city engineering staff looked into this, the temporary speed hump, which is secured to the road with a number of epoxy connections,
Mhm.
the cost to install it, put the epoxy in, and then remove it was about the same as it would be if you were to do the same with a permanent concrete or
Interesting.
other speed hump.
Okay. Yeah, Lisa?
Thanks for the presentation, Charles. I used to be on the Public Works Committee, for those who don't know. I'm thrilled that High Road is going to be on the 5-year plan. Thank you for that. And I'm disappointed about Century Avenue having to move to 2029, but I understand it's connected to the county's delay in moving forward with the bridge reconstruction. I think we want those to happen near each other in time. I'm going to bring up one thing about the Lake Street reconstruction and the construction of a park. Very excited about both of those. I was sad to see the raised crosswalk go. I think it needs to be said, you mentioned the complete streets policy. The raised crosswalk was more of a safety feature for pedestrians than it was a speed bump for cars. So I didn't listen in on the discussion, but at the Ped Bike and Transit Committee, it was reported that the discussion seemed to center on whether or not a speed bump would be useful on a street that has a dead end. And I would just remind everyone on Public Works that it really was, the only reason it was being considered in the first place was as a pedestrian safety feature. So your points about the complete streets policy and improving the way we implement that, those great points. I look forward to making it possible for Ped Bike and Transit and Public Works to work together more often.
Thank you. And I unfortunately was not at the meeting where that raised crosswalk was removed. I was observing Passover with my family. But your point about it being a pedestrian safety feature is well taken.
It's more of a speed hump than a bump, right? Because it's a raised platform.
Right,
For
but
the-
but its main purpose, I mean,
Right.
it would have the effect of forcing cars to slow down, but the big
sure.
thing is forcing them to see pedestrians
Mhm.
and making it easier for pedestrians to get around.
Yeah, they're pretty common.
We have also discussed at our meeting last night with residents the possibility of exploring an ordinance change for the speed limit on Lake Street to reduce it to 15 miles per hour from 25. Consistent with state statute, that is something that we may be able to do, depending on, of course, engineering analysis and a few other factors.
Very good. Any other questions, comments? I don't know. Let's move on to item 3. Thanks a lot, Charles.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it. Okay, item 3 is a zoning ordinance, chapter 10, for the initial discussion of potential revisions. And Mark, do you have a?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
As we were finishing the ordinance before it went into effect on March 1st, we were already identifying areas that we would come back to at some point, but obviously we needed to just finish the ordinance and move on. So we have been tracking changes now as we've been working with the ordinance, and there's a number of mostly minor changes. And this is the first iteration of changes. There's I shouldn't even say iteration. This is the first, let's call it roughly half. There's others that we will bring to you in coming weeks. So this one focuses on the themes that are in green. The first one under definitions. These are roughly in the sequence of the ordinance that they appear in the ordinance. And a lot of these are straightforward. And I think will not require much discussion, but we definitely would like your feedback on some of these items. So under decks, we based on some feedback we got from, and interpreting the code, we felt this would be a way to help clarify and enhance the code, adding the language in red. I'll just assume that if you have questions, you'll let me know. The second one, though, is an area that,
Mark?
sure.
I have
Oh,
a
I'm sorry, I
question.
didn't see. you.
Yeah, sorry, that's okay. I have a question about this one. So I see the word elevated. It seems to me like we're introducing a new term called elevated deck in the definition of deck, and that's confusing to me.
Okay.
Are there two different kinds of decks?
You know what? I should have brought my ordinance with me just a second. I have it on the screen, but let me grab my paper.
That's the problem with ordinances.
There's a table on, let's see, for Daphne's benefit. It's a section or a page. Let's go to page.
105?
She can probably search for it and find it faster.
She's got it on the screen.
There you go. Actually, yeah. So that term's already in there, but I was also thinking specifically page 159. Oh, there you go. I was thinking of that section in particular. Do you want to look at the one on the screen that I have?
Mark, the ordinance online is not finding anything when I search for elevated deck. So I wonder if it's not defined.
Well, the one online should be able to do searches on it. I've used it as recently as yesterday.
I think that the table that Daphne has displayed is an image, so it is not searchable.
Oh,
Well, Abby, I mean, this is the one that is online and I was able to search it, so I'm not sure.
If I could interject, so I'm searching the copy I have, which is the adopted one, and I see that there are two terms for deck. One is a freestanding deck and one is an elevated deck. And so I think instead of defining deck, maybe the definition should be elevated and freestanding. Either that or the definition of deck needs to reference both elevated and freestanding.
I think the key here was to emphasize that when it exceeds a height of 12 inches, then it's considered. Well, I see your point, Alder Haniro. This is something that I flagged a month ago and then I just pasted it in here. I didn't do any more thinking about it. So I'm sorry that so it's not fresh in my mind, but let me look at my notes that I have.
Yeah, I mean, it's something you all can work out later, but the point simply is don't make it more confusing by defining one and not the other.
Totally understand. And the whole point of all these changes is not to introduce confusion, but to try and add clarity. Treating elevated decks as part of a structure versus patios or freestanding decks. So that's what I had as my note. And we added this on April 22nd. So I think the issue was patios / freestanding decks are one category. And we wanted to make it clear that anything that's more than 1 foot is elevated, an elevated deck, and it's part of the structure. That's the intent. Okay.
Right. But just make sure before you define what an elevated deck is, make it clear what you mean by a freestanding deck
I see.
to
Okay.
distinguish between
Got
the
it.
two.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So building height is an area that we have gotten some feedback on as we were adopting the ordinance, and then since adopting it, we've had questions about it. And that prompted me to look at a few other ordinances, both in the area here as well as simply doing a Google search. And also Alder Haniro sent the Minneapolis example today, which I appreciated. That was a good one to reference as well. So this is the current language we have. It's the vertical distance from the established grade to, and then it lists various points. It's very, very simple. It's about as basic as you can get for a definition. But the way I've interpreted this is that then this means the height is considered relative to the grade on each side of the building. It's not in reference to the front of the lot, which is how the old ordinance that we had in place for 40 years referenced it. Interestingly, Fitchburg, so the old ordinance, you see there a distance to be measured from mean ground level. That's what we had in place. Fitchburg and a couple other area communities had a very similar template as our old ordinance. And so they still use this definition that you see from the old ordinance today, except they substitute one word. Sun Prairie has its own definition, average elevation of the adjoining ground level or the established grade, whichever is lower. So they also don't refer to the front, just like we do. They do not refer to the front lot line. Dane County, I have a definition for them in there, and that is a reference to the front of the building. And then doing a Google search, I found there's, of course, many different ordinances out there. Some of them were extremely complicated, and they introduced the concept of being 10 feet away from the ordinance and taking 10 points or 18 points, I think I saw in one case. This one, for some reason, from Utah, Elk Ridge, Utah, is one of the first ones that jumps out in a Google search. And that happened to me back in March, and it happened to me again last week. So for some reason, this one is out there. And what I like about it is that it takes the four corners, so it factors in the four corners of the property and averages them. And so that seems like a very straightforward way to go.
If you looked at the International Building Standards Code?
So that is another approach. The problem with the International Building Standards is that the IBC, that is something that has come up. It gets very technical very quickly, and it's not readily apparent to, I don't have that in front of me, and I guess what I could have done is put that in here, and I can get that to you for the next meeting if you'd like. But that becomes very difficult to administer from a zoning standpoint, in my opinion. We can bring it back to you for your consideration. I'm happy to do that. That is something that a developer in our community has proposed. I think it isn't something that I think the public would relate to as well. One of the concerns we have, of course, with zoning is we want to make sure that zoning makes sense and that people understand zoning regulations and that they don't require, an advanced degree to interpret. So I'm happy to bring that language to you as well. In hindsight, that would have been good to include in the memo.
It would be nice to see that.
Yeah.
I have another question is, why do we feel the need to change the building height in our zoning after how many years have been there?
So we had you mean to change from what our old definition was?
Mm-hmm.
So it was the definitions that we got in this code, almost all of them came from a template that was used by our consultant. So we didn't specifically say, let's go in and change our definitions because we've had a problem with them. That wasn't the direction we gave them. We said, we are gutting our ordinance and starting from scratch, essentially, with our new zoning ordinance. So we didn't set out to say, we didn't say we had a problem with our old building height standard or with most of our definitions necessarily. We had certain things like lot coverage, which was vague. We knew we wanted to get rid of that. And so we moved to impervious surface area, impervious surface ratios, et cetera.
Right.
So we knew some areas, but building height was not one we had flagged. So it came to us in this new template, which is also used by communities like Wausau and Fort Atkinson, which also use the same consultant. And I did reach out to those communities to talk with them about their experience with using that definition. And they do not have the same experience that we have in terms of having a lot of interest in redevelopment. So it hasn't come across them as well, but the Fort Atkinson building inspector is also, the zoning administrator in Fort Atkinson is also their building inspector. And he brought up the building IBC definition that you just brought up, Kurt. And we talked about that just this morning. And he compared that with the zoning code that they have. And he agreed with my interpretation that the zoning code does not match the IBC. And so the zoning code clearly states it's in relation to the vertical distance from the established grade without distinguishing which side of the building. So, and in Wausau too, they haven't had any differences of opinion on this. I would be happy to bring back in fact, I could probably find it pretty quickly, but since you haven't had a chance to review it, I think it'd be better just to bring it up at the next meeting.
And
Oh.
I'd like to just make a couple comments. When we were doing the ordinance rewrite, I was reading the building height and I thought that this was going to come back to us because there was some, it just wasn't totally defined. And so I'm not surprised that we're getting questions or that this needs to be addressed now. To me, obviously, how the building looks from the front is important, or from the street side is important. That's where the vast majority of people perceive building height. But if we look at impacts to neighbors, surrounding neighbors, they can be on the sides of the backs as well. And I think it's a little bit unfair to not include height measurements from those other angles as well. So to me, I kind of like the idea of saying, hey, it's the average height of the four sides. That makes a lot of sense. But I think you need to keep working this through a little bit and we should come to a consensus.
Yeah, and I'm happy to get you more information and do more research. And like I mentioned earlier, Alda Hanairo gave us language today from Minneapolis, which at first seemed very confusing, but then as I read it, I can understand why it was written the way it was written. So we can put that in the packet for next time as well.
Okay.
And City of Madison has a definition that's not unlike where you're going with it.
Yeah. I had trouble finding that. And they also get into definition of stories.
Yeah.
And I was reluctant to introduce that concept because to me, arguing about what's a story when a story can be various heights, a story can be 8 feet, it can be 12 feet, it can be 18.
Yeah.
And to me, that gets around the objective of, what the public sees, whether a building's 50 feet tall or 55 feet tall is, how do you measure that? And it doesn't really matter how big the story is per se.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But they have this, an average
Right.
of different sides, which I think is a reasonable approach.
Okay. Aaron, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, just for input, I think now Commissioner Bruce has covered it, but I just want to echo what Mark was saying about the IBC. I think we're getting too complicated for public interpretation there. IBC will change over the years, so you have a moving target there as well. I do think, as Randy just pointed out, the grade plane average is probably the safest way to go. We don't want to discourage development on, difficult sites, slope sites, when we have limited infill as is, and we definitely don't want to cause city staff any more PUDs. So that is my opinion on it.
Thanks, Aaron. Anybody else?
I would just like to
Lisa?
comment on the stories versus feet, because I was wondering, when we say something like building height, maximum building height is 3 stories or 36 feet, which is it? Is it 36 feet, no matter how many stories are in it, or is it 3 stories, no matter how high the stories are? Because I don't think that is clear in the ordinance.
In every zoning district, we mention we have the stories or feet as an option. Are you suggesting maybe we should just go with feet as an example?
Well, I just think it should be clear what.
Or the lesser of.
Right. Is it the lesser of? Because what if somebody builds a 3-story building and the stories are all 20 feet?
I understand the concern.
Yeah, so it's just something that I flagged as maybe we need to clarify that before.
Well, that's a good point. It's not untypical to, especially in a mixed use development where you have commercial on the first floor, you want 14 or 16 foot ceilings. And then 10-foot or 8-foot ceilings above for apartments. So it is a little confusing, I think.
I early on, when we came up with the heights, I was trying to avoid having the situation of where the first story might be allowed to be a taller height. And so, in fact, I think I'm the one who proposed the 12-foot intervals for basically a story is 12 feet. So everything goes in multiples of 12. So a 4-story is 48 feet, 5-story, 60 feet. And that recognized that the ground level might be a 14 or 15-foot high, you know, because most other stories aren't going to have a 12-foot
Right.
floor to ceiling or floor to floor, you know.
Mhm.
So let me go back and do a little bit more research on that and provide you with the IBC for the next meeting. I just wanted to flag it for you that this has come up as a topic of discussion where there's been differences of opinion. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
And my interpretation as zoning administrator has been that this applies to all 4 sides as written. It's the only way you can interpret it. Because it clearly doesn't it doesn't make reference to the front lot line anymore. So therefore I have to look at it from all 4 angles. There's just no other way to interpret that. So, but you know, we're out to improve we knew we were going to have to make some changes and enhancements, and that's what we're discussing. So I'll come back at the
Okay.
next meeting.
Sure, thanks. Next.
Oh, and then I also had in that additional recommendations for definitions, coming up with definitions for established grade and natural grade or existing grade. So that's something I haven't done yet, but I wanted to, since those topics are coming up in the relation to height, I wanted to bring that up. Number 2, zoning district standards. We have just the desire to have some consistency here. So editing the multifamily low section so that the accessory building height is the same as other districts. This is, you know, basically a housekeeping item, as is the next bullet, where we should have had an asterisk. And I almost didn't include this in here because I think it's just obvious that's what it should be. But for transparency reasons, I wanted to note that we are going to make that change. Any questions about number 2? Item number 3 is commercial kitchen. This is also in response to a specific situation that has come up. In fact, it came up as we were wrapping up the code. A prospective new user or relocation of a use in the Middleton Business Park is what prompted this change. So I don't want to go into the details too much of the particular case because that's not so much the point. It's just that they had an outdoor meat smoking component, which made me resistant to refer to them as a commercial kitchen, because that would then, they could have been allowed in our mixed use zoning districts, and which means University Avenue and downtown and where we have housing above. And I could immediately see the risk of incompatible uses, you know, having someone who's averse to having meat smoked in their, you know, coming into their living spaces. So I just saw that there was some possible problems here with this section and with number 4, the indoor food land use. So that's where all these changes are. That's where I flagged these as changes, and they need more work done with them. But I wanted you to be aware that this was an area that has already come up. And item 4, specifically indoor food land use, we had 2 industrial land uses that seemed to overlap with each other. So I asked our consultant, who still had a few $100s left in the budget, to consolidate those 2, the budget from the original project, to consolidate those 2 land use categories into one, the food cultivation and farming and indoor food production and processing. So I'm asking for if you have any feedback at this time. Otherwise, this is something to keep working on. And
This doesn't cause any problems for the school district's facility, does it?
no, but that I would call that a commercial kitchen.
Yeah, it is.
And but the use, let me see here, how did that get phrased? So I think technically the commercial kitchen is not a permitted use out in that zoning district. if I remember right.
Yet we have one.
We have 3. So that's why I'm just trying to make sure that our ordinance is reflecting current patterns. So commercial kitchen is a permitted use in our avenue, mixed use urban districts. So the area by, west of Parmenter Street, Culver's, Fitzgerald, that area, Bruce Company. Mixed use avenue, we all know is Century Avenue, especially University Avenue. Parmenter Street is mixed use. Well, that's a neighborhood. That's a conditional use there. But then in our industrial park, light industrial is permitted use, but then medium industrial, a commercial kitchen isn't even allowed as permitted or conditional. And that's what all those areas are out there. So
Medium?
that's-
I thought they
yeah.
were light. Oh, interesting.
We have low, medium, and high intensity industrial areas now. It used to just be industrial. We used to just call it industrial. So that's why we're tinkering with these land uses.
Okay, Lisa?
Why not make commercial kitchens permitted uses in all of the districts you're citing here?
Instead of conditional uses
Yeah.
where they are. Well, that's,
I mean, as
well-
for the emissions, aren't there other like nuisance laws or anything that regulate emissions? Because, let's face it, if you live next to a restaurant, you're going to be smelling something, and it could be, anything that you find offensive, or you could live next to a place where there's barbecuing outside, rat fries and things like that.
Move south and find out.
If we have them as conditional uses, doesn't mean that they aren't
Permitted.
approvable.
Right,
It just means that the plan commission would have the opportunity to consider impacts.
right.
So that doesn't seem, I don't think we're talking about a lot of commercial kitchens anyways, and I don't think that's that big of an issue. I do think that we need to make a change regarding the industrial districts. If we've got commercial kitchens there now, and right now they're not permitted or by conditional use, then we need to make a change there for sure. And I would be okay, depending on how staff feels about it. Myself, I would be okay with making a commercial kitchen a conditional use, not trying to make it more difficult to build them, but it does have some impacts in mixed use areas. So I could see Mark's point.
I can see it too, but I also think I'm just thinking of recent experience and how even if there is a really good supportable reason to do the commercial kitchen, all it takes is pressure on elected officials and it won't go through. So, and in all of these suggested changes, I'm trying to think of how to streamline the process and encourage development. And this one struck me as something that would be good to make permitted.
well, and then ultimately that's the last sentence of the first paragraph is what I'm recommending, is that at a minimum, we allow commercial kitchens in our medium industrial districts as a conditional use, if not a permitted use. It just seems to me that, that's where we have them already, and there's just something we missed. We didn't pick up on that the first time. It caused me a lot of angst when this user came up and said, hey, I want to move from one location to another. And I looked at it as like, that's a problem. And so I asked for details about that particular business and their operation, and there were different ways I could classify it. So again, I don't want to get into too many details, but it just made me realize that we had a problem here with the code. And clearly food preparation on a grill is compatible with, or it seems like that's consistent with the commercial kitchen, but we want limits for it so that you're not smoking out your neighbors above you if you're in a mixed use building. So
And don't we aren't there other laws on the books, either local or state, that would regulate that?
well, we have performance zoning standards in Article 6, performance standards, and we also have standards in the land use regulations section where I feel like we could buttress those other laws and reference them so that they become part of the criteria for approval. Instead of just relying, I mean, I'll look into that, Alder Hanaro. I think that's a good point, but I would like them to be at least reference those other laws so that people know, and it's not just, oh, I can locate here and then there's no, like if somebody moved into next to, I'll just pick on the Kestrel, you know, it's a mixed use area now, and suddenly looks at the zoning code and says, oh, we can operate here. And then we start getting complaints because the zoning code didn't prohibit it. And then we have enforcement issue with other laws. And so it just would be nice to be proactive with the zoning code and make sure, A, that we're allowing things where we want them, and, you know, putting in some standards where we might have some concerns with those operations. So
I just want to add 2 cents. I think it's always good to be thoughtful, and I appreciate that you're being thoughtful. And I do want to thank Alder Haniro for providing those insights. And I say that because in my thought process is that if a cupcake place moves next door to the Kestrel, I would love that. I would love those smells. Someone else may not love those smells. So sometimes when we're trying to make things better by foreseeing something, there will always be another new thing. So, and that might be where Alder Haniro was going, is there a way to do it so that we're not becoming too much? Also, I love cupcakes. I think that's the point of this topic. My apologies.
Unless you're diabetic. Just kidding.
Can I suggest that we rethink institutional though as a conditional use? Because I'm trying to think, so like the senior center, assuming it doesn't move, you know, they would like a commercial kitchen. So do they have to, you know, that should be institutional. What about schools? They have commercial kitchens, they're institutional. If a hospital locates here, it just seems like the institutional district, commercial kitchens should be permitted.
I'll do some more work on that.
Yeah, in our case, the school district works out of Business Park with all their food stuff, and then they're just reheating and keeping warm at the schools. But I'm sure that's different in other areas. What about grilling on decks? Is that not permitted in apartment buildings?
Well, there's, to Alder Haniro's point, there are other standards, building code standards, but there are rules about operating a deck on a wooden structure. I mean, I don't know what all those rules are. That's more of a property management issue, I
Right.
think.
Okay.
But so I don't know how else to answer that other than, but that, to your point, is you might be living in an apartment and someone below you is,
Mhm.
you know, you might be vegan and someone below you is, you know, I get it.
Well, even worse, there's been fires on decks too, so that's,
Well, right,
or on
right.
balconies or whatever. Anyway, it's just something to think about, I guess.
I think it's one thing to smell your neighbor's grill going on occasion, but it's another to have sort of an industrial type manufacturing of food and, you know, 24 or not 24/7, but you know what I mean? Some intensity.
We used to have a bread baking operation out there. Can't think of the bread. But anyway, he's not there anymore.
Gardeners?
No, it wasn't Gardeners. It was a guy that made, can't think of it's a special kind of bread. Can't think of the name of it right now.
So I'll keep working on that. Item 5 is accessory land uses. This came up from our engineering staff. So as we actually received our first permit for an ADU, within a few days of the ordinance taking effect, we came to start realizing that there was a question about how to properly display the address on it. So that's why this is here. Minor accessory structures, balconies, this is also related to the deck issue earlier, just to add some clarity. The word balcony didn't exist in the table, so I was proposing we add that. Small solar energy systems. I think this came up with our colleague Kelly Hilliard and the discussion that we had with on Maywood, right? Isn't that where this came up, Abby? I think the discussion you had about the apartment building that had the small solar and that was in the front yard. So we thought, well, why aren't we allowing those? So rather than just restricting them to a side or rear yard, we're saying, why can't they be in the front yard? So I guess I was curious about if you had any concerns about that.
I would allow them in the front.
Yeah.
And I would probably wish that they weren't in the front. I understand the reasoning, but
I could see.
the front yard is such a public space that I can see where that would be, problematic for other people in the neighborhood or in the public. So I understand both points. I definitely want to support the solar and so I was thinking, well, if the front yard's on the south face, they may not have any other options.
I guess I look at it as it is a public view, but it's still private property. And just like I would think we would not prohibit people putting solar on their roofs on the street side, which is unsightly to many people. I just feel like the front yard should be fair game as well.
I will add, so Mark mentioned that apartment on Maywood, Plan Commission looked at it, and so that was like a carport kind of situation where they would build the carport, and then put solar on top of it, or like have like gazebo structure and then also put solar on top of that. So that was kind of, the thought we were going with that kind of situation. And I believe it's also one of the requirements for the Soul Smart certification. That's what Kelly and our sustainability intern June was working on. And so allowing those systems in the front yard, I think, would help us with our certification.
Okay.
Taking notes at the same time. So the next one is item 6, swimming pool standards. You are familiar with this one from April when we came before you out of the blue with a pool in a residential property. So that hopefully will be the last time that happens. So this will take care of that. Basically allowing administrative approval for those set of Plan Commission. We're aware from our planning consultant of some, Vanderwall made us aware of Act 16 last year and some state law changes related to that. I checked with our city attorney about this, and we're not overly concerned that much needs to happen with our code. We don't see a need for significant changes. But we are tracking all these, and we need to review how the state law has changed specifically with respect to EV charging stations. And yeah, so that's an area that we're still analyzing, but specifically the League of Wisconsin Municipalities analysis of Act 16, we don't see a need for any significant changes at this time. Item 8, PUD review and approval procedures. As we've been working on staff reports that reflect our new our zoning ordinance, consistent with our new zoning ordinance, I was struck by these 2 provisions in particular, wondering why they weren't part of the GIP or the GDP process, as opposed to why they are under SIP. So I'm not sure why that was written that way, but anyway, the point is I'm suggesting that is better suited for the GDP process.
That makes sense to me as well, Mark.
Yeah.
And when I was looking at the PUD section, and it may be in there and I just didn't see it, but is our ordinance written so that PUDs are last resort district?
Well, it's not so much that it's written that way. Well, I'll say yes, it is written that way because we have created new zoning classifications that allow a lot of the development that we used to rely on PUD for. So I guess to answer your question, PUDs are meant to be.
I think
More
that's,
seldom.
I think that was the intent.
Yeah.
But to me, it isn't expressly written out that way. So if, for instance, if I felt like, yeah, you know, I can do most of these things in the MU district, one of the mixed use districts, but I don't like one of the setback requirements or one of these other things. Let's ask for a PUD zoning. And I don't want the PUD to be used as a way to circumvent, you know, other ordinance requirements. I guess was my thought process. And I didn't know if we needed any language to that effect. There's certainly going to be reasons to do PUDs. There's going to be times when none of the districts make sense. But I just wouldn't, I don't want it to be used as a method to get a variance.
So sections, in Article 2, number 70, we talk about PUD districts and what the purpose is. So there are 8 or so purpose statements there. And then a section on intent. So I think that, did you review that as you prepare for the meeting too?
I skimmed it.
Okay. All right.
Honestly, I skimmed it. So I didn't, yeah.
So I think, I don't know how else to answer your question right now, other than,
I guess you're the one that's going to, the staff's the ones that's going to have to determine that anyways. I guess if you feel confident that the bases are covered and that you're doing what you think needs to happen, then I'm okay with that. I just wanted to make sure that it was something that was obvious that we didn't have a problem with later on. That's all. So just bringing it up to your attention.
Yeah, I don't see any language in my 30-second review of this section, 10:10:45. I don't see anything that kind of indicates this is a last resort. And I don't know how other municipalities, if they make that clear or not, but I like the idea of somehow signaling that, okay, if you've arrived at this section, it's because something really wasn't working for you elsewhere.
well, and that's why I was referring to section 10.02.70. The intent of PUDs are to encourage, promote, and provide improved environmental design by allowing for greater freedom, imagination, and flexibility in development of land while ensuring substantial compliance with the basic intent of this chapter. They allow for diversification and variation in the relation to uses, structures, open spaces, and heights, etc. So I mean, it's general language. There's some additional, city may require as conditions of approval any reasonable stipulation, limitation, or design. I mean, it clearly is open-ended enough to provide that flexibility that we've relied on over the last 40 years with the 70 or so that we, allowed to be created. But I do believe with our new mixed use, especially our new mixed use zoning districts that, and with our reductions in setback requirements in many districts, that we have an environment where we need fewer PUDs.
But
So-
what's to keep, and I don't know the answer to this. What if someone wants to propose a mixed use building in that meets the flu map, but they don't want to do everything that's in the mixed use zoning code, and they go for a PUD because they need more flexibility? How do we then review that?
Well, we'll review that with, you mean the staff report? So we assess they have to go through a justification for why they want the zoning change. There's a public hearing. The Plan Commission makes a recommendation to the council. And we consider consistency with the comprehensive plan. It's a legislative, ultimately, decision by the council. It's not an obligation to allow the rezoning. I'm not sure how else to answer the question.
Ma- Maybe an explanation of the more onerous process of PUD belongs in this section. I think I understand your point is to get developers to follow, to make their developments consistent with the zoning districts that we have so painstakingly
Right.
defined, and only go to this section as a last resort. And so maybe it should be stated that this is a more difficult process. However, if this is what someone wants to do, here's what you got to do.
Yeah, or the standards for approval are higher.
Right.
Some way of,
The standards are higher, the timeline is longer because it has to go through hearings and council, plan commission and council approval. Just something to indicate this is a bigger burden, but
Right.
if this is how you want to go.
Yeah, I think that part 2 in the intent section, it actually kind of looks like we're encouraging it. It's still like,
Yeah.
this is going to allow flexibility. This is going to encourage and promote
Thank you.
environmental
Yeah.
design.
exactly.
Whereas like we want to say like, this is the last resort.
Yeah.
Instead of.
That's why I thought the word onerous might be, because when I read flexibility and creativity, I'm like you, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh,
Oh,
that sounds great. But if
They
I-
want me to do this.
If I saw onerous, I'd be like, ooh.
Well, but at the same time, we have a prospective developer that has questioned whether the zoning is proper for their site. And I've outlined the PUD process and they haven't responded to that in terms of going in that direction. So I think it's not necessarily I don't know that I think there still is probably some reluctance or an aversion to seek a rezoning using the PUD process. I don't know, but we'll look at the language and maybe I can compare this with a couple other communities with their PUD procedures. Again, this was, well, I don't know if this specifically was in the template from our consultant, but I will check that.
When the PUD language made a lot of sense when we were working with an older code and we needed flexibility from that, outdated code. But now we've got a very permissive code and one that allows for quite a bit of development. I just think that to me, that makes sense to try to either, then why, I'm not sure why we have different zoning districts. We could just negotiate everything.
Mhm. Yeah, I was actually thinking that one measure of the success of our zoning code would be the reduction in the number of PUDs that come forward.
Right.
Because then that would be a sign that our code is workable.
Well, the irony is in 2 weeks, you'll have a public hearing on a request to rezone to PUD,
2.
but
2 requests?
well, the other one's a
Conservancy Bend
GIP.
and Greenway.
But that's an amendment to an existing PUD. I don't consider that the same.
Okay.
Well,
Zoning map amendment to a PDD GIP.
but from an existing.
Mhm.
In the case of the other one, without going into the details of it, because you'll have it in 2 weeks, but the other one is a carryover from zoning that was in place before the ordinance was changed. So in both cases, they're not truly a rezoning to a new PUD.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how this, to get to review it and see how this all works.
Right.
But my first thought is that we really should, we've gone to a lot of work. We've got a very permissive zoning code. Staff we want to eliminate, PUDs. We should kind of expressly state that.
Okay.
Other edits to the ordinance, it's just really minor stuff here, just not so much that I am looking for feedback. It's just, this was just an example of edits that I'm making. And there's a few in there that I don't think are going to need to be called out. This was just an example. And then we had during our approval process last fall, we had a a suggestion to, should we look at possibly revisiting the color schemes on the zoning map? You know, and Daphne, do you happen to have that handy, or can you click on the link at the top of the memo, please? We can look at the zoning map quickly. She's probably pulling it up separately. There we go.
Is that something that would require plan commission and council action, or would that be administrative if you're not changing the
That's-
districts?
I would agree with that, but I still, before we change it, I guess I wanted policymaker feedback on it. But that's a valid point.
So I think this might have come up because I suggested it or asked about it.
I wasn't sure if you wanted to.
Sure, no. And I understand that these are the standard colors used forever in zoning. I just am not a fan of designating the higher density districts with darker colors. I think it's in this day and age, it sends the wrong message. And I think I'll just leave it at that. And I get that, you know, as you get more dense, it makes sense to denote that with a darker color, but the use of brown as that darker color is troubling.
I thought the reason might have been that the variation between some of the colors was not significant enough to be able to discern it from the map. That was the only thing that I was a little bit concerned about, but I do see your point.
Yeah, I'm colorblind, so I don't have any comments.
Well, I did look at some other zoning maps. I didn't do an extensive review, but as Alder Hanira noted, it is quite common to have yellow for single family style housing. And to move through the other shades, through two family and multifamily. And so many people we trained ourselves, if you will, to use this color palette over time. It doesn't mean it can't be changed, and it doesn't mean that some communities haven't changed it. So it was a comment we had received, and Alder Hanira, I didn't know if you wanted to speak to it. That's why I wrote it the way I did.
I mean, the fact that it is an artifact from the early days of zoning, I think reinforces my argument in favor of changing it. And I would just note that we've got purple and we've got blue as shades that could easily be swapped out for yellow. And I just would.
This whole variety of colors that we could use.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a very good
if
point.
that's an administrative change that the staff can make, I would encourage you to think about it. And I don't know, Mayor, do you think this is something that council needs to weigh in on?
I'm open-minded.
If you got a legend,
I
What do you-
think that's
yeah,
the best
I think it's
thing is to
administrative.
just make the change and move it on.
It's pretty easy to make changes using, I mean, it's not hard to change the symbols. So our
Yeah.
Daphne is our,
It's not hard for Daphne to.
no. Abby can do it. Abby can't do it as well as Daphne. I can do it even less well, so.
I do appreciate you all asking, and I just want to say, I know council has so many things that they're trying to get through, just like you all are. So anytime we can save a step, if it's reasonable, I support that. So thank you for asking.
I did think it was worth bringing up to the Plan Commission just because now that this is published, if we were to suddenly make a change administratively, there might be a question why we made the change. So I just wanted there to have a discussion about it here.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
Well, it could be for clarity. In my point, I thought it was for clarity that we were trying to make this just more readable.
Yeah.
That's where I thought this was going.
Okay. Well, thanks for the feedback. We can Not, it won't be an experiment with some different options. So, well, as I said, there's some homework from this meeting that I'll come report back on. And then we have some additional items that we're working on that we'll bring to you in the coming weeks. The timing of this, I think, would be, the latter half of the year is where we would probably be having a new hearing on the changes to the ordinance.
I had one more that I wanted to bring up, and that is the modular and manufactured homes. We had a presentation from the Wisconsin Housing Alliance in the Workforce Housing Committee, and I asked the representative if, because she mentioned that usually it's zoning that gets in the way of her members of her association being able to build. And I asked, how does our new zoning code stack up? And she said she hadn't had a chance to look at it. So I would suggest Daphne's got her contact information, maybe asking her to weigh in on those. I did notice that I think it's the manufactured home, the building height is something like 18 feet, which is fine if it's a mobile home, but some of the houses that she was talking about were actually like split level and could easily exceed 18 feet. And I'm just thinking ahead to when the city wants to try to, use our TIF increment to make affordable housing available. We don't want to, miss the opportunity to use something like the manufactured and modular housing that we were learning about.
We're using TIF for residential.
Our closure, when we close the TID, we're going to take the 1-year extension for the
Yeah.
Gotcha.
affordable housing.
Yeah, okay.
And Alder Haniro, can you remind me, is it about $12 million that we will
That's what
have?
Bill Burns estimates $10 to $12 million
For the total.
for the total.
Yeah, so that'll be a significant opportunity.
When are we closing it out?
26 or
27?
27, yeah.
Is that 3?
And I had one more observation about the food production. That I forgot to bring up at the beginning. So looking at the separate section, indoor food production and processing, that's the term, but it says any business whose principal activity is the growing, production, or wholesaling of products that are either grown or stored. And it doesn't really say anything about processing. And so I wondered if that needs to be looked at again.
I will go back and check that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other input on that? That takes us to item 4 on the agenda, update from staff and a request for feedback on a public hearing process.
Yes, so Mark had already mentioned this, that at our next Plan Commission meeting on May 28th, we're going to have 2 public hearings for zoning map amendments. Both items have already appeared on a Plan Commission agenda previously. One is the Greenway Mixed Use Project and another is Conservancy Bend. And because of the timing of the meeting schedule and the fact that they had already been on an agenda previously, we administratively set those 2 public hearings instead of bringing them to the Plan Commission to set. I think our process is dissimilar from how other communities handle it. Most communities don't have their commissions setting hearings. And so we were just proposing for you to consider just deferring to staff to go ahead and administratively set those. And then we could, of course, make you all aware so that when you get if you start receiving comments from members of the community, that you're aware that you have a public hearing coming up, but that we wouldn't be adding the 2 to 3 weeks to the review timeline to have the Plan Commission set those.
And I would add that our ordinance, the zoning ordinance doesn't require, it's silent on this. So I think bringing this in line with other communities makes a lot of sense.
I do too.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Done.
Okay. All right, that takes us to item 5 as a Plan Commission appointment to the Community Campus Committee.
Yes, our former Commissioner Erdman Hermans was the city's representative to this committee coming out of the Plan Commission. It's a 9-member committee and the Plan Commission has 1 representative. I have done a doodle poll with the other 8 members. And it seems that this committee is likely going to be meeting on the 4th Thursday of each month from noon to 1 p.m., but that probably is not going to begin until late June. Because I don't think we can get a quorum for that date and time in late May. So we are looking for the Plan Commission to make an appointment to the committee, preferably somebody who is available on the 4th Thursday of the month from noon to 1, and the meeting would be hybrid.
So who doesn't have a job?
Commissioner Summers here. I would be interested if no one else is. Noon hour is very easy for me to make, and I do have a job.
Okay.
You have many jobs, Aaron.
I do.
Thank you, Commissioner Summers.
Yes, I think that'd be great.
Is there a motion?
It's an appointment.
Yeah,
Who makes the appointment?
we have to make
Chair?
it.
I will support whatever.
Well,
I think
I
it's-
move that we appoint Commissioner Summers to the Community Campus Committee.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Aaron.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the end of our agenda, so I will move to adjourn. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Aaron, Stephanie. Thanks.